think we can.
Oops.
So I'm going to go ahead and open it up.
Hello.
Hello, and welcome to our class on mastering the interview and elevator pitch. We request that you mute yourselves for the duration of the class. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or after the presentation, you can ask to be unmuted and you can ask your question. Thank you. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. I think we'll go ahead and get started. And while I'm doing the introduction, there'll be time for a few more minutes for people to continue to join in. I'm Rohini Gupta with the Howard County Library System, and I'm joined by my colleague Cherise Tasker, also with the Howard County Library System, and Rachel Bachman, who is the career specialist at UMBC. Welcome to our class on mastering the interview and elevator pitch. This is the third in a series of job and employment related classes that we were offering. Our first two classes were about building your resume, and the second class was on building your social brand and LinkedIn profile. Both of these are available as recordings on our library YouTube channel. We'll be sending out those links as well as the links to today's class in a post-class email. Meanwhile, just a couple of housekeeping details. This is a meeting, so please be on mute while the presenter is presenting. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Cherise and I will be monitoring the chat, and we'll be sure to answer your questions. There is a survey. Please, we'd love to hear from you and what it is that you're looking for. So please do fill in the survey. The survey will also be in the follow-up email. And I guess that is about it. And it is my pleasure to welcome Rachel today, who has been super awesome. And everybody has just loved her classes. They have been just packed full. And I think that's about it. And I'll hand it over to Rachel now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much and welcome everybody. So today we're going to focus mostly on interviewing, but also talk a little bit about that elevator pitch or 30-second commercial, kind of whatever you would like to call it, that introduction that can be used for networking, maybe in a job fair or in other situations. So first, I want to just kind of clear up a few things and set the tone for what we're going to talk about today. So we want to be sure that an interview is not you being grilled or interrogated. You're the only one feeling pressure or in the spotlight. Ideally, it's going to be a little bit more like a blind date. It should be a two-way street. I know it's hard to feel that way sometimes, particularly when you really need a job or you're really excited about a particular role, but you need to take this only opportunity that you have to also be asking them questions, to be looking around, to be learning as much as you can to make sure this is going to be a good fit for you, that you're going to enjoy it, that you're going to thrive there. It's going to be a match for your skills, your style, your personality, all those types of things. So it should be a little bit more conversational in style. So again, that purpose of an interview is to find out if you're a good fit from both sides. It isn't just to get the job, it's to really determine that fit for everyone. So today we're going to kind of go through the 3 steps of a successful interview. So the preparation that you need to do before, how to perform well during the interview, and then touch a little bit on follow-up as well. So the first thing that I personally do when I'm preparing for an interview is I make a list. And I want to really think about what are the key things I want them to know about me before that interview is finished. I want them to be as related to the job description, to the company information or mission as possible, but also I want to include a few things that maybe make me unique from some of the other candidates who might have other similar experiences or skills. I might want to share a couple of my just personal strengths or qualities. It's whatever you think is going to help make that decision for them to see your fit for this particular role. So you need to really kind of do this process for each thing. You have to really tailor all of your ideas and content for each specific job. And I always think of it as I'm kind of constantly speaking to the job description and to the company information that I know. So I have that list. Here's what I want them to know about me. Then I'm going to also in advance come up with some stories, some examples to back some of that up. Because it's one thing to just say, to sort of proclaim, I'm very organized. And it's another thing to give an example of a time you used those organizational skills and a time that they really shined. That's going to highlight what you're truly capable of doing, things that you have accomplished. So stories and examples are the real heart and soul of an interview. And I personally find that that is where a lot of people tend to be lacking. So once you sort of have that list, you have those stories. You will have also potentially, hopefully, done a little bit of research into what are common interview questions just in general. What are some common interview questions in your industry? Maybe even at that specific company. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But sometimes I also find that people have these common questions and they practice them, which is good. And I do suggest doing that, but they almost over practice them to the point that they assign one of those specific things from the list and one specific story to one specific question. But even though all of the questions that you find are common, you never actually know what they're going to ask you. So you don't want to associate a specific answer or example too strongly with only one possible question, because you don't want to then miss the opportunity to discuss that whole thing. If you had decided that you were going to really emphasize this one particular project that showed your problem-solving skills, if they asked you about what's your greatest strength and you were going to say problem solving and you had this great story, but then if they don't ask you that question, you still want to be able to tell that. So once I have my list and my stories, I want to imagine lots of different ways that I could potentially work that information into an interview. So I could talk about that problem solving story with greatest strength. I could also talk about it if they ask me something that is maybe specifically about problem solving. I could, maybe I worked on a team on that project, so I could work that in if there is a question somewhere about teamwork type of things. So just having an idea of lots of different ways and options that you can bring these things into the interview is an important step of the preparation. So this is, a little bit of what I'm talking about, sort of trying to illustrate that idea of making a list of what are your talking points. It doesn't have to be 5, it could be more. It could be, I would stay under 20, but you want to say, here is why I'm perfect for this. These are the reasons. And then the stories are that further proof that I'm amazing. So you need to have those things kind of working in tandem. So an example is, instead of just saying, oh, I pick up new technology very quickly, and they would just have to sort of trust you, take your word at that. It's going to be stronger to say, oh, when I started my last job, I only knew the very basics of Excel, but within the first few weeks, I had learned how to build a pivot table. That's a more advanced feature. That's a specific story that is proving what you're saying. Not that they aren't going to believe what you say, but it's still always going to be stronger to kind of back it up. So another key step of getting prepared is researching the organization and becoming very familiar with the job description. But you want to, they're bound to ask you, why do you want to work here? What do you know about us? They're going to ask you questions like that. So you need to have a good answer for those. But you also need to know things about the organization so that when you're crafting your answers, when you're creating your list of talking points, you can relate it to the work that they're doing. You can say, I read this article about this new project that is tackling this problem. I have a lot of experience. I'm very interested. I could contribute in this way to that endeavor, or, whatever it is, so that you don't want to come across as just generally great and capable and, ready to tackle anything. You want to be the best candidate for this one specific role at this one specific company. So you really need to know as much as you can about them. Another step of the preparation piece is making sure you have questions prepared. So this is partially in line with that two-way street aspect of interviewing. You absolutely need to have questions at the end. They're going to ask you if you have questions, and you need to have them. It's absolutely fine to write them down and bring them with you, or just consult them if you're doing it virtually these days. That's totally fine and expected. I would recommend at least 3 to 5 questions. I usually try to come up with closer to 7 or 8, just in case some of them might get answered through the course of the interview. So I still have questions to ask. Not only is it going to show that you understand the role, but it's going to show that your curiosity, your engagement, I think it's very important. You want to make sure that you're not asking about like benefits or vacation or anything like that, or something that you could easily find out on your own, maybe on their website. One of those 3 to 5 questions should always be, what are the next steps in this process? Or do you have a timeline for making your hiring decision? Something along those lines, because not only is that good information for you to have to know what to expect, but it also can help set those parameters, the timeline in particular, the parameters around when to follow up. They might say, oh, you're our last interview and we're hoping to decide by the end of the week. Well, if you don't hear by the end of the week, then you should absolutely reach out. But you don't want to reach out before then, because they told you at the end of the week. So it gives you that clarity as well. I always like to ask at least one question sort of the interviewer. What's your favorite thing about working here? What has your history been, or your path within the company? Anything. It can be anything, but that helps turn it a bit more conversational. It helps you, again, figure out, do I want to work with this person? Do I want to eat lunch with this person? Is this going to be a good fit? So these questions need to be not just questions that you make to kind of try to sound impressive or knowledgeable. It should also be questions tailored to what information do you need to feel confident moving forward in this role if you were to get an offer, to be sure that this is going to be something that you're going to enjoy and be fulfilled with. So, asking about how do they review performance, what about advancement paths? Like, how long are people typically at the company, and where do they move to from this role? And is there any particular challenge you would like to see this person address? Or what's the number one thing that they should accomplish in the first 30 days? Or what kind of training is provided? There's tons of questions, but also depending a little bit on the company, the seriousness sort of the company and of the interviewers. Also, you might want to ask one or two, I don't want to say fun questions because you really don't want to take it very far, but things that are, again, getting more at some of that culture. Do people tend to eat lunch together? Those types of things. One time I was asked in an interview, not something that I asked them, but I have in fact taken it and asked it at another employer since then. But once I was asked, what is my number one go-to food to bring to a potluck? Because they have a lot of potlucks there. And I thought that was an interesting question, and it also just gave me a sense of what it's like there. And it was good to know that they have those types of more social interactions and stuff. So once you've prepared as best you can, then it's go time. We're doing it's time to perform. And so, clearly you want to be sure that you're dressing the part. I would pretty much say a suit or a jacket of some sort, at least, is going to always be the best default, unless you're working in a super, super casual environment, or applying to something that's a super, super casual environment, or maybe a slightly creative type environment or company. But still, you want to think about, what do people seem to wear there on a daily basis? And you want to be more dressed up than that. So it's definitely important, even in the time of these virtual interviews, that you are looking the part. You want to be sure that you test your technology in advance. I was just meeting with a student over Zoom last week, and she had an interview coming up, but she was cutting in and out really badly. Her audio was just not coming through very clearly, and she had strange lighting where she was sitting. So part of what we talked about was, let's find a different location. Let's test a different pair of headphones or a different laptop or something. Like, you can't have an interview under these exact circumstances. So making sure you're comfortable with the technology, give it a couple of test runs if possible. Thinking about that nonverbal communication is important, more so in person, but still in the virtual world as well. You want to show that you're interested. And part of that is, being attentive and making eye contact and not fidgeting. It's okay to gesture a little bit, but try to not overly gesture. And in terms of the eye contact, if it's a setting where there's multiple interviewers, you want to make sure that you're kind of looking around and you're sort of making an eye contact with everybody who is present. If it is going to be a virtual interview, one tip that I think has been helpful for a few people I've worked with is to take a Post-it note and stick it next to your webcam. Not only can it help draw your attention to the camera instead of looking, down at the actual person on the screen. But you can put a couple of keywords. You can list a few of the things from your list of things you want them to know about you. You can put a few kind of triggering words on that Post-it that's right there where you're always staring, so it can help kind of prompt you if you start forgetting things. Another important thing to think about when you're interviewing is that they aren't just looking for the answer. It's all of the stuff around that as well. I really find that people are so hesitant to, I guess they're worried that they might sound too rambling or something, but I really find that people have answers that are almost too short. There is definitely something to be said for being concise, don't get me wrong, but you need to provide the context around your answer. It helps them understand, how do you think? How do you communicate? Why is this your answer? If somebody asked you, oh, what's your favorite color? You probably wouldn't just say blue, the end. You would probably say blue, or this particular shade of blue, and it's because it reminds me of the ocean and I find that really relaxing, and so I painted my living room blue, or whatever. You would explain, why are you answering that, or why should that person care that you're talking about this thing. So you need to help them, you need to connect the dots for them. You have those things on your list. Problem solver. You don't just want to say, I'm a really great problem solver, and that's fantastic. You want to say, I'm a problem solver who can solve this problem for you, or who, is known for doing XYZ that is in line with the work of the company. So you want to help them see the value of your past experiences and why you're telling the certain stories that you're telling. So tell me about yourself. So this is pretty much the only question I can guarantee you is going to be asked in every single interview, or some slight variation. So this one you need to be prepared for. It's usually the first question, so it really can set the tone. And people who flail on tell me about yourself, I find it's really hard to recover from there. So you're going to get it, practice it, be sure you know what you want to say. You want to highlight specific qualifications for the role. It isn't just your life history. I think sometimes people really go a little overboard on almost too much information, or information that isn't particularly relevant. You want to really hone in on just the parts that make you qualified for this position. Think about what makes you unique. What is your brand? So you might have the same 3 years of technical experience that most of the other candidates have, but maybe you also used to do something in writing, and that's a unique combination. And that is maybe something that not everyone else is bringing to the table. So you want to be sure that you're sharing that. You want to demonstrate that knowledge of the company that we talked about. Convey passions or goals. Sometimes that's easier than other times. Certainly if it's going to be a job like maybe working with children or in social services, it's pretty easy to say, oh, I'm really passionate about this, or I really love education, or whatever. If it's going to be a job, in a call center, it's hard to convey passion about that. But, you still want to talk about, like, you love talking to people, or something like that. Try to eliminate personal information. Sometimes people want to say, oh, they have a wife or this many kids, or they live here, or, they have this many siblings or something. Generally, nobody needs to know that. There could be a case for including information potentially about your children if it has an impact sort of on your career trajectory. I wouldn't mention like hobbies, or, I also love to paint, or things like that. And then once you start developing this kind of tell me about yourself, this little pitch, yes, it should, if it is for an interview context, it should be specific to that job, but just the general idea of this question and putting together a little blurb in your mind that you use to describe yourself, your skills and abilities is going to serve you in lots of different settings, because it also basically becomes your elevator pitch, your 30-second commercial, whatever you want to call it, that introduction that you can make. Maybe you're networking, maybe you're attending a job fair, particularly now in this world of virtual job fairs. Really the only impression that employers are able to get is the little introduction that you are typing into the chat to let them decide if they're going to, continue the conversation with you or not. So you need to have a very strong introduction. Key things to include in this Tell Me About Yourself. You want to do a quick overview of the basic facts. This is definitely important if you are doing it in a networking setting, but it's also important for an interview as well, because yes, they have your resume and maybe your transcript, or they have information about you. They might have just had 10 interviews in a row, might have blurred together. Maybe they read your resume 2 weeks ago. So you want to give a little refresher. I have 3 years of experience doing this. I have this degree, whatever it is. Some of those just quick facts. When you made that list at the very beginning of the things you want them to know about you, maybe you want to pick the most important one, or even a couple to just mention. You don't want to tell the whole story, all the details, but just drop them in to tell me about yourself. It can prompt them to ask you some follow-up questions. It's just setting the tone of like, here's some great stuff about me right out of the gate. You want to focus in on key strengths, skills, abilities, personal traits you might have that are going to serve you well in this role. And be sure that you're demonstrating knowledge of the industry, the company, using the appropriate terms. And I don't want to say jargon, because you should never get overly jargon oriented. But if you're applying to something in a technical field, you want to use some technical terms probably in an interview, just to convey that you are comfortable in using that language. So when you think about the Tell Me About Yourself more so as your elevator pitch in that networking situation, it should be a bit more broad. You don't necessarily know exactly maybe what roles this company has available or what this person could maybe offer you. So you want to keep it a little bit more broad so you aren't blocking out any type of opportunities, but you do want to indicate some areas of interest, because unlike if it was an interview, they would obviously know why you're talking to them and what you're interested in doing. But if you're just sort of broadly introducing yourself to someone, you want to be able to say, I'm very interested in, public policy, and I would love to do something with, this issue or whatever. But again, keep it kind of broad so that you could maybe be on the data side of it, or the government side of it, or the lobbying side of it, or whatever. Give some flexibility there. If it's happening in person, you definitely want to end with some kind of question, even virtually, like at a career fair or something, end with a question so that there's like a prompt for response and for the conversation to continue. I find a lot of times people, particularly at job fairs, will rehearse their little blurbs. They'll go up to people, they just say it, and then they don't include a question. And so then it just sort of ends awkwardly, and the person they're talking to isn't quite sure, how to follow up. So ending with a question can be good. Depending on how your little conversation or your pitch goes, I wouldn't include this in the initial paragraph about yourself, but while you're having that conversation, I think it's always good to ask for referrals. Is there somebody else I should be talking to about this? Do you know anyone else who has a similar research interest to mine, or whatever the case might be, so that, again, you're continuing to build from this one interaction. One thing that you should definitely expect in pretty much any interview is going to be some behavioral questions. They're the ones that start with, tell me about a time, or give me an example of this, or describe a situation where whatever. These questions want to see how you reacted what skills did you pull from in one specific past experience, because that is going to predict, the idea is that past behavior predicts future behavior. So if they say, tell me about a time that you were juggling multiple priorities and deadlines at once, how did you navigate that situation? You wouldn't say, generally, when I have a lot on my plate, I tend to do XYZ. You would want to say, this one time I had these 3 things. Here, they were all due on the same day. I approached it by scheduling time on my calendar or making priorities or however it is you handled it. But you want to try to pick one time, not talk about a general approach. And part of what is going to help answer behavioral questions is utilizing the STAR method. So that stands for situation, task, action, and results. So most stories and examples that you're going to include really throughout your interview should mostly have these components anyway, but definitely every answer for a behavioral question must have these 4 components. They are going to be specifically looking for each of these 4 things. So you need to set the tone. Here's the situation. This is what I was tasked to do, or this was what was going wrong. Here is what the objective was. Here's exactly what I did, the very specific actions that you took. Also, maybe a bit of how you reacted as well. And then results are so important. You can't just sort of say, oh, there was this angry customer and they were demanding a refund and I was able to talk to them in this way, and then just stop. You need to be able to say, oh, and we didn't have to give them a refund and it was actually fine, but maybe I did give them a coupon or whatever happened. So you need all pieces of the puzzle. People tend to skip over either the action or results in my experience. And while all of these pieces are important, I would say probably action is the most important. I talked at the beginning about making that list of things that you want them to know about you. One thing that I would also do while you're sort of preparing that list, while you want to get into a really positive, confident headspace, go into the whole thing like, I've got this, they're going to be lucky to have me. I would also suggest coming up in advance with a couple of things that might be more learning moments, as I like to think of them. So maybe a time that something really didn't go according to plan, or a time that you failed, or a time you had a lot of conflict within a team, things that you don't want to only think about things that were perfect, because if they will tend to ask you at least one question that is more geared in that direction. And you don't want to go to the biggest failure you ever had or the most conflict ever. You want to pick something that is going to, meet the criteria and satisfy that question, but that you were really able to turn it around, or you really learned a very important lesson from that moment, or whatever. So that's part of the getting prepared, but I sort of skipped over there. But I brought that up because the conflict question I do feel is pretty common. Some kind of question about, describe a time that you faced conflict while working as part of a team, something like that. When I ask that in a practice interview, almost always people skip the action. They almost always say, oh, we were working on this project as a group. One person maybe wasn't pulling their weight, but we worked it out and we ended up meeting the deadline and all of that. The we worked it out bit, that's what they want to know, because the idea of that past behavior predicting future behavior, they want to know, we hire you, we put you on a team, something happens, or you're not getting along or whatever. How do you react in that situation? What are you going to do specifically? what have you done historically? So what will you likely do in the future? All right, so then the last thing you want to make sure that you're doing is following up. Super important, and a step that tons of people forget. I still tend to be a bit old school, and I like to send a handwritten note, but now that everyone is working, most people at least are working virtually, that is not possible. Definitely send an email. But even in other instances, an email is fine. It's also good to know, this is another reason that it's good to know about the hiring timeline or the next steps when you're asking them questions, because if they tell you, oh, we are deciding tomorrow, then you need to send that email the second you get done with your interview. Or if they tell you have a little bit of, oh, we're not deciding for 3 weeks, then maybe if we do get back to working in offices, then maybe you would have time to send a handwritten note, and maybe that would be an extra touch. If you're working in more of a tech kind of setting, or a more like startup, younger kind of culture at a company, they might prefer email in all settings. Some more traditional type companies or company cultures might prefer a handwritten note. You have to sort of gauge that on your own, but you definitely want to make sure that it's going to get there in time no matter what. So email is sometimes a safer bet, and certainly in these pandemic times, email is the way to go. I wanted to point out some other resources and things to check out. So I mentioned at the beginning, researching common industry questions. To be honest, often just Googling it gets you a lot of good answers and suggestions and options and resources. So certainly do that. But Glassdoor.com is a really great website. They have some interviewing information on there, but they also have company profiles. And on the company profile, there's an interviewing section. And actual people who have interviewed with that company will go on Glassdoor and post, these are the types of questions, or these are the exact questions that I was asked. So it's super helpful to get a sense of, what is this company's style? Do they keep it more traditional? Is this some sort of company where they're going to ask you like wacky questions, like how many bananas fit in the Empire State Building? Just getting a sense of that type of thing. College Career Center websites have tons of interviewing information, not just your own if you attended college, but any others, any that are near you, any that just seem like a great, interesting school. They're all going to have, some common questions, some other resources, some tips. If you did attend a college, I would certainly check their resources, because as an alum, you might get a little bit of extra information. You might have access to practice tools that they may have. You might have access to scheduling a mock interview, a practice interview with a staff member, but that's going to sort of vary by each school, but it can't hurt to look. For people who might be making a career change or going for a second career, AARP has a ton of great resources on all sorts of career things, but they have an interviewing section with interviewing tips that I find really helpful. I personally am also a fan of the Muse. It covers all career-related things, but they have tons of like tips and suggestions, and people who make hiring decisions, giving some tips about interviewing. And I also am a fan of Ask a Manager. I think it's just askamanager.org. And they take public questions and answer them. And so you can look through all of the archives, you can look at all the things that they've compiled, but there are a lot of questions on there that have been asked about interviewing. And then you get a perspective like from a manager on whatever the different question or issue is you might have. So these are just some of the things. There's a lot of other things out there as well, but I wanted to give you some suggestions that you kind of take with you and move forward after the presentation. that's really it. I wanted to be sure for this one in particular to leave plenty of time for questions. People tend to have a lot of more specific questions about their specific situations when it comes to interviewing. So yeah, please let me know if you have any questions.
If you have any questions, we'd welcome them. If you'd like to ask it yourself, I'm happy to unmute you, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question.